Hey everyone, I've been editing the better half of the last 2 days, and this is the final take I have to do. I've been bunching together a couple of examples of coaching sessions that I did, and I have to say it turned out quite well. I wasn't too sure at the beginning, kind of started as an experiment if I could actually help people, but by now I'm gaining more confidence. Seems like literally everybody that I coached so far could actually improve his lap times, which I think is nice, not only for them, but also for me, so I can offer this to everyone a bit better, maybe. Um, the examples I've chosen are from various drivers that I took on different tracks and different cars, so we'll just walk through those. Roughly, we'll have 10 different examples, and what you'll see mostly is an onboard or a chase cam view of both cars. The left side of the screen will always be me and the data. I always use the track map to show additional kind of information, and the right side of the screen belongs to the coachee and his input data. For the first example, we have the S10 V8. We are on Spa and we are looking at the first corner. Um, Looking at the still image right now, it doesn't look like his line is awfully off. His speed seems alright. He's fully committed to the brake. The issue isn't really spottable yet. If you look at the track map that I added additionally, though, you can see the speed the car is carrying mapped onto the track, and by that you would be able to see, for once, the position, the speed, or where in the corner he puts the lowest speed, and where I do that, for example. The bigger issue that he had, though, was that he was 4 to 5 seconds off, and it wasn't easy to spot at the beginning since the line looked alright, but then once I went to the cockpit view, it became quite visible. And his issue is he's turning way too much. So if you look out for the replay once I start rolling it, is how much he's actually turning. And that will lead to a couple of problems. First, the car will not rotate as much as he would need to. Second, once he opens the steering again, he will come across the point where the front tires actually bite all of a sudden, which will unsettle the rear, and that will again cause him to be more careful with the throttle, not be as confident onto the straight, and that will likely just cost him speed onto the straight. And this is what we could see in Motec again, that where he lost time was actually on the straight and not in the corners, just because he couldn't pick up the throttle as early. And the third thing, of course, is when you understeer that heavily, like he does in turn one, you'll see in a second, he just heats up the tires. And he noticed that on the long run he was killing the tires, so that is where he lost all his time and the tire life. I will actually pause for the duration I show the slowed down replay, so you can take a look at it, roll it back and forth, and not have my voice interrupting all the time. In the second example, we have the same guy, or same coachee, same car, same track, obviously, and we're looking at the end of Les Combes. I changed the track map data shown here for now, and whereas it was speed before, now we're looking at the turning angle in the wheel, visualized also in terms of colors, and you can see that there's a point in the corner where he turns a lot all of a sudden, and whereas you can see for me that the steering is just way more stable, so to say. So once you start, or once I start rolling the replay, you're looking out again for the super high turning angle in the wheel. And you can really see how he goes into the steering and goes out again while he's trying to find the point where the car has the optimum grip, and he's just kind of not finding it. The result of this again in this corner will be that even though his turn-in point isn't ideal, we roughly turn in with the same speed, but throughout the corner with a heavy understeer, and for him having to wait till he can pick up the throttle again because the car isn't turning as much as it should, he would lose a lot of speed, and at the axle of the corner we're looking at about 18 to 20 kilometers difference that I then can carry on onto the straight, and that is where he eventually loses the time. One more example of the same car track combination is the no-name corner on Spa, and we again see the same pattern here. He's braking. He's a bit too slow on entry, and he would actually go to the inside of the grass at that kind of speed and that turn-in point. So what he does is just turn way too much, understeer the car, so it makes the corner. But you can already kind of tell that this is not the way to do. I just kind of wanted to show it an additional example of what you can do wrong. Again, the understeer will heat up the tires, make him go slower through the corner because it doesn't rotate as much. It will compromise the axle because he can't go into the throttle. And again, he will lose time onto the next straight. In the next example, we move away a bit from the steering throttle inputs. Well, it is a steering input, but we're referring to a different issue here right now. And you can see while I'm on the left side braking, I'm braking as close to the white line as possible, and throughout the braking zone actually touch the white line. He's committing to the corner way earlier. That's probably because he's a little inexperienced and his eyes are already focusing towards the apex. And then, like on a motorcycle, the hands just start to follow the eye movement a little already, and therefore he leaves the outside line while still being fully on the brake and just compromises his entry into the corner a little. I'll just let it play, and I think I could have hundreds of those examples, but I just leave it with that single one because I think everyone I coached so far had smaller or bigger issues with using all the track available. That is really just a lesson from that simple example. Go as far to the outside as the track limits allow it. Go as far to the inside as the track limits allow it, and try to use everything on the outside as long as it doesn't slow the car down. For the fifth example, we are changing the car and track. We are now in the Ferrari 488, and we are on Hungary, right in front of turn 1. Also, the coachee is now a different one, and he wasn't as much down as the guy before in Spa. I think it was 2.5 seconds at worst. I think more like 2 seconds. And he couldn't figure out why he was going slower than I was. So he approached me. We had a session, and I looked into his issues as well. And while some people, as in the previous examples, turn too much, there's also the option that you actually turn too little. And it seems like with a mid-engine course, this is a more general pattern, so to say, that doesn't only apply to the Ferrari. Now the track map shows the turning angle again, and left side is my data, right side is his. So we can again see that now it's quite the opposite actually to the examples before. My turning input is more, whereas the turning input of the coachee is less. And we can also see where the turning in the corner is done and where, based on that turning angle, the most of the rotation in the corner is done. And you can see while I put the apex a little earlier, get the rotation done earlier, get the car lined up for the straight ahead, probably am allowed a little earlier throttle application. You can see for him that all the turning in the corner is done a little bit later, and he's just way more hesitant on the entry. So to sum it up into maybe 1 or 2 sentences is, I turn more for less amount of time, get all the rotation done in a smaller amount of time. While he steers a little less, he unsettles the rear just because the Ferrari is a car where this is an issue. The rear just can't follow the pointy front as much, so you can work around that by forcing the car into a tiny bit of understeer. In this example, he didn't get his head around that so far, so he takes longer to make the turn. He's a bit hesitant on the throttle just because he doesn't have the car in the right state, right between under and oversteer, and therefore he will lose all his time on the next straight. And again, I'll row you through without any commentary. We stick to the driver, car, and track. Now we are looking at turn 2, and again the track map will just show the turning angle of the wheel in a colored and graphical way. Yeah, I would say the line we're both taking is very similar, so this was definitely not his issue. I was seeing that, I don't know, half a lap in, I knew the line he was choosing wasn't his problem. And indeed, he has more than a decade of sim racing experience. He just couldn't figure out why he couldn't nail the lap and get the lap time down. So again, in turn 2 has the same pattern as he has or had in turn 1. Maybe there's a tiny difference that I stay more inside for longer, but his bigger issue is that he's again not turning enough to stabilize the car and get the rotation done. Maybe because his force feedback doesn't tell him enough, maybe he just didn't come across that point in the steering where he felt the car to rotate. But after I talked him through, he figured it out. He increased more than a second, I believe. And this was pretty much his problem throughout the whole track. So again, it is, except for a small amount of time, I will be the car traveling faster into the corner, and I put my slowest point in the corner quite late. Whereas for him, he maintains the speed for quite a longer amount of time. So to say, his speed graph isn't as peaky and pronounced. It's way more averaged out compared to mine. And this means just when you travel at a higher speed, you can't do as much rotation. And in the end, that will mean that my car is lined up for the straight ahead and his isn't. And so he needs to pick up the throttle later just because he doesn't get the rotation done. And then again, his time loss will be on the next straight, and not so much in the corner as you would believe. Like, you would always think, I need to improve my corners, but in fact you lose the time on the straight because you did the corner wrong. So what you're looking out for is he's hesitant on the throttle. I will have more exit speed and gain everything on the straight just because he doesn't have the confidence in the car, in the steering, and doesn't get it rotated as quickly. We stick with driver, car, and track. We skip 2 turns. We're now looking at turn 5, the long uphill right-hander on Hungary, which is, to be fair, a very tricky corner. It tightens towards the end. It's fairly bumpy. It has a little bit of off camber, so car grip will be very hard to judge. And again, we can see that he isn't turning enough. But let's start from scratch. Once I get the replay rolling, you'll see I do have a wider entry. I do carry more speed into the corner, and again I find the turning angle that I need for that corner just a tiny bit quicker, and then I stay there and let the car work off the speed until the point where I reach the late apex in the corner, and then I can confidently pick up throttle. Whereas for him, he's searching that kind of turning angle throughout the corner. You can see him go in, go out. He isn't comfortable with the car state, and since he isn't going as wide into the corner as I am, he's carrying less speed. And in the middle of the corner, he notices that his car is turning well as he's become so slow. And once he notices that the car has become so slow, he's picking up the throttle a little just to not go too far to the inside, because that would compromise the whole corner even more. And by picking up the throttle, he kind of brings the car wider, but also gets less rotation done, and he compromises the exit. And then he has to back out of the throttle again because he sees the exit of the corner approaching where he doesn't want it to be, then has to wait a little, and then he can finally commit to the throttle, and he again will lose a fair amount of time onto the straight. skipping the chicane, going for turn must be 7 or 8, I think, depending if you count 2 corners in the chicane. You can actually see by the still image that he will have, or he has, a wider entry into the corner. So he's not doing bad there at all. The problem then becomes he brakes a little too much, the car becomes too slow too early in the corner, and his apex therefore will be also too early in the corner. Then he really can't turn as much as he would like to, or as much as the car can really do and the car can rotate, because he would then end up too far to the inside. So what he does is mid-corner, he kind of picks up the throttle, plays around with it a bit to adjust the car's speed and try to keep the line. But this then means that throughout the whole corner, he will keep a slow average speed for quite some time, which of course is going to cost him time. And then since he doesn't put the apex where I do, if you look at the replay a couple of times, you will see that I put the apex a little later. I force a little stable understeer into the car. My speed is more peaky, so I go in faster, become slower mid or late in the corner, and then can fully commit to the throttle on a late apex in the corner. Whereas for him, it's just a little go in, go out, a little faster, a little slower. He's just doing too many corrections, and mainly because his entry speed is too slow and he doesn't find the correct or safe turning angle in the Ferrari this time around. For example, number 8, we switched code G again. It's again the Aston V8. This time we're on the Nürburgring. And I'm also willing to show a different example now. So we had turning too much, we had turning too little, we had a bit of overslowing before the corner. This time we'll be looking at pedal overlap. And therefore I chose the track map to show something different. This time we will only see the position of the throttle graphically visualized on the track map. And again, my data on the left, his data on the right. And we can already see, looking at the track map, that for me, start of the braking zone, the only throttle application you will see is when the car automatically blips the throttle to cope with the downshift and bring the RPMs up. Whereas for him, you can see upon corner entry, it kind of becomes green again. So he's picking up throttle there, while, of course, he's still also braking. Once I roll the replay, what you're going to look out for is he's braking a little earlier. So he will be a bit slower going into the corner. And I had the feeling that he's going into the throttle to kind of cope with that too slow speed he's carrying into the corner. So he felt he was getting too tight. So he's kind of speeded the car up, or at least slowed it down less by applying the throttle. Maybe he also felt some insecurity with the car being not as stable as he liked. So he gave it some throttle to stabilize the rear and not get too much rotation that he couldn't work with in the car. The thing is then, we go in about the same speed, he might be a little lower, but at a later point, as I reduce my speed, coasting and braking deeper into the corner and waiting for the second apex in this one to appear, there's a point in time where we carry the same speed. The only problem for him is, and where he loses the time, is that he's already slower a tiny bit, let's say 2 to 3 seconds before I am. So again, his average speed in the corner will be a lot smaller just because he brakes a little too early in this instance, doesn't brake as deep, and kind of trails the throttle through the corner, compromising his line and the rotation the car would be able to do. And then on the exit, you can see that we're pretty much matching. Probably my car is lined up a tiny bit better because I get more rotation done, and then I'm more confident in the throttle, but this wasn't his biggest issue. For him, it wasn't the straight so much as it was the corner and mid or early corner where he lost the time. Looking at one last example, we switch the view again because I think it's more pronounced than this one. If you look at the still image that we have right here, we are approaching on Barcelona again in the Aston, the long right-hander in the, I think it's the last sector already, going up the hill a bit. It's a bit similar to the corner on Budapest, because you have a tiny bit of off camber, at least it feels like it. The apex comes quite late, the quarter tightens a bit. And what we are looking here now, and what we can already see in the image, is that his car is already pointing towards the corner. Actually, it's even pointing to the grass. So he's getting this turning done before the right-hander quite late or not at all. So it looks like his entry will be compromised. Whereas for me, you can see the car is still looking at the pretty different direction at the same point in time, which will result in me having a wider entry. For the track map on this one, I chose again the speed to be visualized in color, because I think it points out better what both cars or both drivers in this instant are doing throughout the turn. So first thing we'll see is he's not using all the track available that he could use to enter the corner, which then compromises his line and also compromises his speed. So he needs to brake harder, he needs to brake longer, which results in the car getting too slow in the middle of the corner. He notices that because the car will now over-rotate and already point towards the inside of the corner again. So what he does, he will pick up throttle a little, modulate it a bit, trying to keep that line so he can extend the time until he's finally reaching the exit of the corner where he can floor the throttle. But that again means, like we've seen in some of the examples before, that the average speed throughout the corner is just reduced quite some time. And what you can see in the track map especially is, whereas for me, the speed either decreases or increases, and I think you can see that it decreases a fair amount of time until a late apex, which you can see by the marker on the map. For him, the slowest point in the corner is a fair bit earlier, and you can also see that the area of slow speed is way more extended for him. So again, if you would see the same thing as a graph, you would see that my speed graph is way more peaky. It goes down more, but it comes up higher again, whereas for him, the whole curve is a bit flattened out. Again, that will result in me having the corner done, having the rotation done once the apex or the late apex approaches. And I can put down the throttle more confidently, whereas for him, as he's already in the throttle, he already brought a little load to the rear tires. He now can't bring all the load up as quickly from the braking or slowing down scenario to the accelerating scenario, which will just cost him grip on the rear tires because he can't load them as much as he would need to put the throttle down, to keep the momentum up, to keep the speed up for the straight ahead. And again, he loses a bit inside the corner, yes, but he loses again in the data more on to the straight. And with that example, I think I conclude those 10 examples that we went through right now. Tell me if you like it. Tell me if it told you something about your own driving. Tell me if you spotted something there for yourself. Tell me especially if you have some very different issue, and let's talk about it. Have a coaching session, subscribe, like, all this stuff. Join the Discord especially. There are great people on there now. They're trying to help. I'm trying to help for anything. Have a great Easter weekend. Goodbye.